Today I'm going to talk about placemaking and making places. Starting off, first of all, with a definition of what placemaking is. Placemaking is this multifaceted, so many-sided approach to planning, designing and managing places. When I say about many-sided, that means, as we've talked before, there'll be many different groups or players and stakeholders involved, but also it would involve maybe using several different approaches in terms of what you do in that place and how you construct that place to make sure that you get a successful place. So if we look at this example of the Marina Bay Sands in Singapore, the people that would have had an influence in making this place would have not just been the kind of, local government, but it also would have been kind of national government. We could also say that this is a casino, so it's, TNCs would have had some sort of influence and part in the making of this place. But also, this is a really distinct building. So we can say that, architects would have had an influence and planners would have had an influence in this area. So I'm going to start talking a little bit more about those last two groups and how they can influence places in this video. I've already talked about how placemaking is a multifaceted approach, and that it involves a range of different players and people getting involved, some of which I've put here to refresh our memory: governments, private businesses, local community groups, and the architects and urban planners, which I'm going to discuss today. Before I move on, I just want us to focus on the fact that this is not just about creating a physical location. It's not just about making bricks and mortar. Placemaking is complex in the fact that it's also about how communities use that space. It's also about how economically the jobs it provides, but it's also can even feed into how the place is perceived, the image of the place. And that comes into very much what we'll talk about later about brand, an area's brand, how it's perceived to the world. But we need to just focus on that placemaking isn't just about putting concrete down and making an area look nice, but it's about how that area is also used and the kind of opportunities it provides for the wider community socially, economically, and culturally. So planners can have a big impact on placemaking. We've already talked a little bit about this, but local authorities all have their own planning department. So local governments will have a planning department, and they will often produce something called a local plan. So we talked a little bit about the local plan in Oxford, and this is their plan for the next 20 or 30 years. And why that is important in terms of placemaking is because it is the framework for all kind of new buildings, but also any land use in the area. So if you want to make any kind of changes in that area, if you want to make any big developments, then that usually will have to go through the planning department of the local authority. So they have quite a lot of power in kind of what does get made and what doesn't get made. Not only do planners have a big influence in terms of what land use will be used for, they also therefore inadvertently have an impact on how successful or unsuccessful a place can be. An example of this, if you look at the Oxford local plan for 2036, is that they're encouraging the expansion of the science parks. And so this is promoting this certain type of land use, which is showing the area to be an area of technological innovation, which is going to encourage lots of foreign direct investment into the area and therefore lead to the continued success and growth of Oxford. It could also be used to kind of reduce inequalities. And if you look at the 2036 plan, there's lots of kind of infrastructure that is being focused in deprived areas. So improving tower blocks and creating new leisure facilities, particularly in this area in the southeast of Oxford, in the Blackbird Leys, which is in the most deprived 20% in the country. So planners can have a really big influence in not only how places look physically in terms of how the land is used, but how successful they actually end up being in terms of how they're used by the community and the opportunities that they provide. Architects are another group that can have a big impact on placemaking. They do this often through the design of their buildings. I've got an example here of the Titanic Museum in Belfast, which is this very iconic building. It's a very high profile, high investment design, something that we actually call a flagship development. And it was built in this area, which they've now rebranded and called the Titanic Quarter, which was in an old shipbuilding area. And the point of this was to get people to come and visit that area as a tourist attraction. So the design of the actual building, it kind of enhanced the image of the city, but also it gave this area as an area of new investment and new opportunities. So it improved the reputation of the city in this example as a place of tourism rather than as a place of deindustrialization. And we can also say that architects in some of the designs of the building actually refer back to the history. So if you see this bit of the building here, it's supposed to look like the Titanic ship, and this refers back to the kind of shipbuilding history. The fact that Titanic was built in Belfast. Therefore, not only designing the building can improve the image of a place, enhance the reputation, but it can also link back to some of the social and cultural links and historical links of the place. Architects, through their designs of urban places, can also help us to experience those places and the way that we live our lives in a different way. Here's the example that we've already talked about before of the Red Road Flats, and how architects during that kind of 1960s time, they favoured moving people from slums into these big tower blocks. And initially that was, the way that people experienced that place was very positively, because it got them out of these terrible kind of housing conditions. But over time, this has actually led to very negative experiences in terms of the quality of the buildings is poor. They've led to other social problems in terms of crime and social isolation. So architects and the designs that they create have a really, really, really important part to play in placemaking, and especially how we experience those places. The last two groups I'm going to talk about relate to local community groups. So you might get something like a resident associations, and they are often groups that are associated with things on a local scale. And so they would be interested in normally issues to do with housing, community and environmental matters. So this resident association here is shown just outside Oxford, complaining about kind of housing developments on the green belt. So they are concerned about an environmental issue. So they will have an impact on placemaking if they start protesting and complaining to the local authorities about the conditions in their area. They also might include stuff such as like Neighbourhood Watch, who are very concerned about the community and the protection of that place. This other example I've got on the right here is kind of local heritage organisations. So this can be groups that are normally historical societies. In this case, it's Swindon Heritage. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to protect the culture and the history of places. So they can sometimes do this by plaques, which this is a plaque to commemorate a famous actress who lived in this particular building. But again, it is about making the places, so it's not just about the environment in terms of creating a place, but maintaining and preserving a place for use of the community, but also its historical and cultural links.